Sunday with the words that Paul used to start our worship. I appreciated the allusions and the connection with John's Gospel. This is what he said. Every Sunday is a reminder that God is still making all things new. We gather not simply because another week has passed, but because we seek to return to the well of living water. In a world that, those were John's words, in a world that often feels noisy and uncertain, we come to reaffirm that God is faithful. God's word is living, and God's kingdom continues to grow, often quietly like seed in good soil. I had the opportunity this morning to go for a brief stroll in the very crisp morning air, and the frost was still thick on the ground. I went up High Street past the playground and the information centre, and up the rotary between the trees, the path, and there I saw the daffodil bulbs all starting to come up. Look out for them. A lovely sign of the times, a hope-filled reminder of our wonderful Creator God. Today, we dive into the Gospel of John, looking at another turning point in chapter 4. Now, it was a month ago that Sam reflected on the story of the wedding of Cana and the turning of water into wine. And it was the first of the so-called signs. And today we look at the second sign. Jesus heals an official's son. Now, in John's Gospel, miracles are never just called miracles. They are called signs. And there are 7 distinct signs woven through John's Gospel. And each one is a window and an invitation into how God, through Jesus, encounters human reality, encounters your reality, your world, offering hope and healing. First, there was the changing of water into wine, where ordinary life is infused with celebration and joy. In a moment, we'll look in more detail. The second sign, the healing of a boy from a distance. The third sign, the healing of a man by a pool who had been stuck in the same place for 38 years, restoring movement to the stuck places of life. The fourth one, the feeding of the 5,000 people from a few loaves and fish, reminding us that in the economy of God's grace, there is always enough to go around. The fifth one, walking on stormy water, the reminder that bringing calm in the elements of life that feel overwhelming. The sixth one, giving sight to a blind man, shifting how we see ourselves and our neighbours. And the final sign, the raising of Lazarus, reminding us that love is stronger than death. Now, think for a moment about a signpost on a country road. You're driving down the freeway and you see a sign, Bendigo or Dalesford or Barfold. You don't pull over and climb up the post and hug it and say, "We've arrived." The sign isn't the destination. The sign points to something much bigger than itself. Sometimes signs can be disturbing and challenging, including challenging our assumptions of life that we might have held. In Europe and the UK in recent times, there have been 2 successive unprecedented heat waves. There's extraordinary floods in Texas at the moment. Massive loss of polar bear habitat. We now understand more clearly that climate change is real. that very disturbing, unprecedented things are happening, signs of the times. Two weeks ago, Katie shared a perspective of our life over the past 5 years through times of immense challenge and including COVID. It was also partly a personal testimony, giving an insight into how she feels God has led and supported her as well as our community. And she gave a picture that gave meaning to some of the uncertainty. She spoke of the sense of how we've been ploughing the field, faithfully preparing, trusting in the work of God's Spirit in our midst. And she affirmed how much she is aware of and how much she values how our community shows its capacity for mutual care. Now, whether it's checking in on a neighbourhood in a difficult time, or delivering a meal, or sitting quietly with someone who is going through a very difficult time, whether it's caring for a foster child who's very, very young and vulnerable. We care for each other. Last Sunday, Alex, now we know him as Sandy as well, introduced us to his friend, Paul Coleman. And Paul moved us with his insight and his humour and his wonderful music. And he sang a song that must have been written some 20 years ago, because Katie used to listen to it on a CD in a car when she was much younger. And the words include, "Dear God, I don't understand everything you're doing. If you're real and are in control, you must see the paths the world is choosing. I don't understand everything about you, but somehow I believe it's all in your hands. I don't believe in a God who gives more of his love to those who say they believe. I've read your book and I think it says, it's not what you say, but how you live." And Paul also commented on what he observed in this community in his time here. People caring for each other, serving each other, connected with the community, loving them and being there for them. Caring for each other and our world. It's lovely to hear that Paul will have a role in how the community centre will be developed through the school. So here we are. The foundation of the Gospel of John, which has already been mentioned, John chapter 20. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But those are written so that you might come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his names. These signs and more invite us to a deeper understanding of what gives life deep meaning, and it draws us into life in all its fullness. When we look at these signs together, they are never arguments to win a debate about correct thinking. They are pictures of wholeness. They are about life, flourishing, and repairing of a broken world right here and in the present. Angela reflected a couple of weeks ago on the woman of the well, and she gave us a lovely geography and politics insight into what was happening. And our reading today sits at the end of this long journey. Jesus has been travelling through Samaria, and as we understand, for the traditional community of his day, Samaria was a place you avoided. It was filled with people who looked at the world differently, who had different histories, different theologies. And the tension between the Jews and the Samaritan was old and deep and bitter. Yet, John tells us that a whole village of Samaritans came to believe in a sense of hope, because of a conversation Jesus had with a woman at the well. They didn't sign a creed, they didn't pass an exam. They simply experienced a presence that knew their story and met them with love and with dignity. And they asked Jesus to stay with them, and he did. And for 2 days, he stayed in a space where he wasn't supposed to belong at all. And then he leaves Samaria and he returns to Galilee, back to Canaan, where he's just turned the water into wine. And this is where our second sign takes place. And here's a new character, a royal official. In the Greek text, he's called a basilikos, meaning an officer of the crown, likely serving King Herod. In the local people of Galilee, this man represents the oppressive political system. He represents the authorities who collect taxes and who enforce the imperial rule. He's an outsider by occupation. He's an outsider by politics, and someone most locals would want to keep well away from, keep him at arm's length. But look at what brings him to Jesus. It isn't a political question, it isn't a command, it isn't a debate. It is a dying child. We can all identify and share with the experience of vulnerability. When a child is desperately ill, our human divisions evaporate. Matters much less what your politics is or what your bank account looks like or what particular theological view you hold of the world or belong to. In that moment, you're simply a parent terrified of losing a piece of your heart. Now, living in this rural area, many of you understand the tyranny of distance. We know what it's like to wait anxiously for news from a city hospital, whether it be Melbourne or Bendigo, and the hours of separation. We know the vulnerability of realizing that there is so much that we are not in control of and have to be patient about. This royal official hears that Jesus has arrived in Canaan and his son is sick down in Capernaum. And that's about 25 kilometres away, down a steep and winding road. The official travels that distance because desperation can give us an urgency, the feet to move. And he begs Jesus, come down before the boy dies. Now, Jesus responds with a comment. At first it sounds a bit sharp. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And my tone of voice conveys that sense. And we might read it as a rebuke. But what if Jesus is simply observing a deep human truth? We are all often addicted to needing physical proof, some certainty, visible guarantees before we can begin to relax. We want to see the evidence. We want to see the medicine work. We want to see the rainfall. We want to see the bank balance change before we can start to breathe in a more relaxed way. But the official doesn't get drawn into a discussion about faith. He just repeats his heart's cry, "Sir, come down before my child dies." He doesn't ask for a sermon. He asks for presence, to be there. But we know, don't we, also that the road doesn't always lead to a happy ending. If we're honest, we know the weight of grief and uncertainty in our lives and in our own community. We might be sitting with the slow, frustrating silence of a severe stroke and a recovery that feels painfully distant. We might be holding the grief of a heartbreaking miscarriage at 13 weeks. When the outcome isn't what we begged for or longed for. This story doesn't mock us with a quick fix. Instead, it validates our reality. It tells us that God is present in the middle of the anxiety, down the long road of the in-between space, holding us when the healing takes time, or when the healing has to look like holding each other through the darkness and the difficult times. Then Jesus does something unexpected. He doesn't pack his bags. He doesn't walk the 25 kilometres down to Capernaum. He looks at the man and says, "Go, your son will live." Imagine for a moment being that father. You've walked all this way to bring the healer to the bedside. You want the laying on of hands. You want the visible ritual. Instead, you're given a sentence. You're given a word spoken into the air. And John writes a beautiful phrase here. He says, "The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way." In a sense, this is where the second sign truly shimmers with meaning for us today. The miracle doesn't happen when Jesus arrives at the house. The miracle begins in the space of trust. The man had to turn around and walk 25 kilometres back down that road with nothing but Jesus' words. He had to live in that in-between space, that uncertainty. Again, everywhere, but in rural areas, we know what it's like to live in between space very, very often. The farmer plants the seeds in the dust and waits for months to see if the promise of a harvest will come true. We face seasons of waiting. Trust is not the absence of doubt. Trust is the willingness to walk down the road even when we can't see the destination, even when the outcome is not clear. Now, as the official walked home the next day, the servants met him on the road. Can you picture that meeting on the dusty path? The servants are running towards him, not with long faces, but with joy. "Your boy's alive." And the father asks an interesting question. He asks, when did the boy begin to recover? He seems to want to connect the dots. They tell him it was yesterday at the 7th hour, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the father realizes that this was the exact moment Jesus had said, "Your son will live." The signs point us to a profound, beautiful possibility. Love and care and presence are not limited by distance, by boundaries, or even by the outcome that we hoped for. The healing power in this story reaches across rough terrain of 25 kilometres. It bypasses all the social and political walls of the ancient world at that time to meet a family in crisis. Just notice how the story ends. It says the man believed along with his whole household. In this ancient world, the household was the ultimate picture, if you like, of a rural community, a diverse group of family and workers and neighbours living and working under one roof, tied together by a shared life. When one member suffered, the whole household felt it. When relief came, the whole household breathed out with gratitude. Now, we live in a world, and sometimes in a church, that loves to categorize people or wants neat, perfect answers. But this text invites us to a deeper reality. It suggests that God is far more interested in our restoration and our connection to one another and our place in the world than about our debates or our differences. Sometimes restoration looks like a boy waking up at the 7th hour. At other times, in the seasons when recovery is incredibly slow, or when a cradle remains heartbreakingly empty, restoration looks like a community that refuses to let go of each other. It looks like a household that shares the weight of the silence, carries the meals, sits together in the in-between spaces of life. We don't all have to see all the issues in exactly the same way to be part of this sacred work. The Samaritans found meaning through a simple conversation. The royal official found life through a desperate leap of trust. And we find it here in the way we love one another, through the peaks and the troughs of country life. So may we, in our beautiful, complex, often struggling, but deeply caring community, continue to walk down the road together. May we trust the words of life that whisper to us in the quiet. And may we always be a household where everyone, no matter what they believe, no matter what they are carrying or where they've come from, but finds a place of shelter and hope and enduring care. And may you leave this place knowing that you do not walk alone. Amen.